Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. I hope you are all doing well. Welcome to the Impact Tribe podcast, where we meet exceptional people who create a positive impact on the world. I'm your host, Ashley Bright. We are streaming live on LinkedIn and YouTube. I would love it if you could give us a follow or subscribe. We are at the Impact Tribe podcast on Instagram and YouTube. Now, before we get to my guest, I would love to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, Opus Clip. If you aren't familiar with Opus Clip, they are an AI video editing platform. I use them almost every day. They take long form content and turn it into short, digestible chunks. They do all of the captioning and editing and everything. It's a huge, huge time saver. And so, if you are interested in that, please take advantage. Use this discount code here to get 30% off. Trust me, you will not be disappointed. It saves so much time. All right, now let's get to my guest. I'm excited to welcome a proud father, an advocate for fathers' rights and family court reform. He's also an avid hiker, a yogi, and an attorney. In fact, please, everyone, put your hands together for my guest, Sean McClintock. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Ashley.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful day. We got a new moon coming up this afternoon, and it's an exciting time to start new things and keep going.
My wife has been saying that well, we're not quite there yet, but March and April was my time to shine. So I'm.
That's right. You just had a birthday. Happy birthday.
I did. Thank you. Yes, on the 25th. I'm the ripe old age of 52, and I can't believe that. I don't know what that means. I'm not sure how that's supposed to feel, but I don't feel 52, whatever that is.
Either do I, man. I mean, we're about the same age, and I still feel like I'm 27. So let's just keep keeping on.
Yes, I think you and I both grew up in that time when I think the portrayal of 50 was, like gray hair and like, you're slowing down and you got sensible shoes and stuff like that. And I don't feel like that really applies anymore.
Yeah, I don't think it does either. And it's interesting, because I think I experienced some ageism, in different arenas and that kind of thing. And I'm like, no, we're all good,
Yeah, it's so interesting. We can get off on this tangent a little bit because we're at that same point, but that whole midlife crisis thing I thought was a cliche. And then almost like on cue, it just descended upon me, and I had all those insecurities and thoughts of like, am I still relevant, and all these other things. And if I'd had a little bit of money, I probably would have bought a sports car.
For sure. Yeah, I'm glad I didn't buy a sports car. I bought a 4-wheel drive, so
there you go.
It's more practical.
Practical, a little adventure. You can still get out there and do some things.
Exactly, and it's very good with kids, because you need the space. And it's
exactly. I think that's the other thing too. Is the idea was that by 50 you'd be like, kids are out of the house. It's you're gonna go do your thing and party all night long, or party till 6 or 7 or whenever it was.
It's a different reality now, and honestly, I think I've shared this before. I'm so glad that I waited, to have children, because I feel like I got a lot of stuff out of the way, and I really focus on being a dad now. So
yeah, I remember in the thick of it when they were young, it was this weird sort of dynamic where when you're younger, you probably had a lot more energy to be able to deal with it physically, but I wouldn't have had the wisdom or experience that was needed, I think, to really deal with it. And now at that quote unquote sort of midlife stage, I get it now, when that whole idea of earned wisdom,
And I think the patience that is needed with parenting as well, that I probably wouldn't have had, 20 years ago.
Yeah, I still very distinctly remember. I mean, my wife has been such a powerful person in my life to remind me of these things. And I still distinctly remember one of those, it was like bath time. Kids were going crazy and I had no control over the situation. And I'm just sitting there yelling. And she said to me, they don't understand. And so when you yell louder, it doesn't affect anything positive. And I've always remembered that, even now as when they're teenagers, I'm like, I need to figure out a way to do this differently, because just elevating my voice is not going to really solve anything.
Well, as you know, people of our generation grew up with parents who often raise their voice to try to get their point heard, right? And what we've learned is that we need to emotionally regulate before we can emotionally, regulate our kids. And then we can start to have those conversations that we need to have with them, right? And that's been, I think, a big epiphany for a lot of parents, especially, older parents. I think it relates to just sort of the emotional intelligence of men in general. I think there's been a bit of a learning curve there, and a lot of work that's gone in to developing that awareness and that understanding. And I mean, I don't know about you. I think you would probably agree that I've benefited a lot from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting. I didn't grow up in an environment where there was that level of awareness or understanding. And I grew up in an environment where it was very, I say emotionally cold. It wasn't that there wasn't joy or love or happiness. It was just that there wasn't any real discussion of emotion or understanding feelings. And it's interesting that I noticed with my kids, I have two boys, and I just instinctively have always been very transparent with them. If I'm having a bad day or I was a little short with one of them about something that happened, I'll circle back and kind of have that conversation and have them understand where I was coming from, and make sure I understand where they're coming from, and not let that stuff kind of fester in the background and create this bitterness or this distance.
100%. And I think the power in that is you're actually modeling accountability, you're modeling communication skills, you're modeling emotional awareness. And if we're going to teach our kids anything, it comes from our behavior, right? We can tell them to do this, that, and the other, but until we actually do it and they see us doing it, that's when they learn, right? I'm involved in a book club right now with Anna Loby. Shout out to her, she's a family support specialist over at Southern Arizona Child Advocacy Center here in Tucson, Arizona. And we're reading Dr. Bruce Perry's book, What Happened to You, which if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's co-authored by, what's her name? The famous talk show woman. I'll think of it in a minute.
Okay.
Oprah Winfrey, of course.
Yes.
And so it's a really great book, but he talks about the 3 R's: regulate, relate, and reason, right?
Mm,
So first, that's the regulative emotions, right? And then relate to them on an emotional level, right? We acknowledge, I understand you're upset, or I see you're excited, or whatever. And then the reason comes in at the end, right? And I think often what we experience as children is there was a lot of reasoning at the beginning, with raised voices, and suppressed emotions, but really it's that regulate and relate that are really the key components before we can
yeah.
get to that.
It's amazing just how, in many ways, it's so simple, but it requires being present and having kind of this awareness of what's going on. And, I think that's a great transition into sort of, tell me a little bit more about kind of what you have been up to. I know that in my opening, I said, an advocate for fathers' rights and family court reform. Neither of those sound like easy or simple things to navigate. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about how you sort of, what set you on that path, and then what you're doing now as it relates to it.
Sure. So I've been involved in about an 8-year custody battle over my daughter. It's been very contentious and what people describe as high conflict. And it's been pretty devastating, honestly, very difficult. And I have presented myself. I hesitate and say represented because it's kind of a loaded term. I present myself as a pro se litigant, or what's called in propria persona, improper person.
Mhm.
Um, and I started learning a lot about, family court processes and civil due process, and, studying, learning the law along the way. I had a lawyer for a couple of years, but then, after about 20K in legal expenses, I decided that was not financially viable. And so I've been representing myself or presenting myself since, for the last sort of 6-7 years. Um, and that led me into getting involved with the local organization here, Parent Aid,
Mm-hmm.
where I started out as a client in 2019, basically taking parenting classes and then getting involved in their in-home visitation program. It's called Safe Care. And then in 22, they invited me to come on board as a facilitator. And so I started hosting a weekly dads group, and I started facilitating some of the coursework, some of the fathering coursework that they offered. And then last year in 24, I took on development. And so I started, helping the organization raise money. So I was with Parent Aid for 3 years. I recently left the organization. And so I'm doing more of one-on-one coaching and consulting with people who are involved in family court processes and, just parent type coaching, that
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. And that's kind of where I am right now, but still a staunch advocate and still learning and still growing as a father, as a parent, and as an advocate for fathers' rights. I will say too that I really am an advocate for parents' rights, and not just fathers. I find that, especially here in Pima County, and I think this is really a national endemic situation, that dads are really getting getting the sort of short end of the stick when it comes to family court processes. And I think there just needs to be a recalibration and understanding that there is a lot of dads out there who really want to be involved in their children's lives and are working really hard to do that. And I think there's just a lot of social barriers and a lot of legal barriers, and a lot of sort of what I would describe as cultural lag
Mm-hmm.
that is involved in the court system. And it's really sad, unfortunately, because I think the children are the ones that are suffering ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. We started talking about kind of sort of when the way we grew up and our generation and our parents, and it sounds like there's still this, and maybe not surprisingly, given that it's the legal system, this legacy mindset of like, well, dad's going to go off and do his thing and earn the money, and mom takes care of the kids, and that model hasn't really been realistic, I think, for decades now.
No, and
Uh,
it's shifted too, because the fact is that 55% of households now, the mom or the female is the breadwinner
mhm.
in households. So dads have really taken on more of a interactive role and a present role in raising children. And I think, as you stated, I think that there just hasn't really, the culture hasn't caught up to that reality yet. And then I think too, there's this sort of antiquated idea about, every other weekend and a Wednesday is equal parenting time, but it's just simply not. And we really need to really rethink and recalibrate our whole idea of the family unit, the family system, as it relates to separated parents, which the reality is that 50% of marriages fail,
Mhm.
and so you have 65% of children in this country are growing up fatherless. And that's just a devastating fact. Um, Obviously, the criminal justice system, incarceration plays a big role in that as well. And I think there needs to be some reform there as well. But it's just, we're seeing generations of children that are growing up essentially fatherless, and the outcomes are devastating.
Absolutely. And I haven't brought this up, but my parents divorced when I was 8.
So did
And
mine.
so I know that, and I know that there was, for me, I don't know, like 11, 12, something like that. I started lashing out physically, and fortunately it wasn't directed at anyone, but I was routinely breaking things and smashing things, and I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that this whole thing happened and nobody told me why. Nobody talked about feelings. There was no counseling. There was no nothing. And to your point, it then manifests in other ways, or it manifests behaviors that are destructive, which then lead into adulthood and start to continue this problematic cycle.
Absolutely. And I've been talking to a lot of friends, our age, and a lot of people are really making this realization that, that sort of childhood trauma experience of going through a divorce and whatever other trauma may have impacted us as children, it's a long-term situation. Um, I'm going to therapy tomorrow, and I've done loads of therapy around my childhood, and it's just interesting how it continues to sort of impact my life. And, I think you can probably relate to this too. And we're just constantly sort of relearning and growing. And what I like to call reparenting, this is a sort of idea that I've really embraced, is, sort of being the parent that we needed as a child to ourselves now as adults, and also being the parent that we needed as a child to our own children. It can, I think, be very powerful as well. But I think we, again, underestimate in our culture the impact of childhood trauma and how long it persists in subtle ways in our behaviors, in our relationships, in our communication. And I think we still have a lot to learn about that.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because I think that we societally, we think of trauma as some, real heavy duty trauma, whether it's physical or emotional abuse, or it's, sexual, or it's other things that are, no doubt trauma. But it's all of those little kind of micro traumas that we go through over time that, when you weren't picked for the team in elementary school and people made fun of you, or a parent shouted at you, and I still have memories of that. My father was never physical, but I do remember those moments, those outbursts. And
100%.
I mean, this is 40 years later, and I still have an image of that. And how has that affected how I interact with people or how I move through the world?
100%. And, I think that one of the things that we don't really talk about too much is the toxicity of neglect, like whether it's emotional neglect or just a presence, a neglectful presence. Many of us had parents that were physically there, but they weren't emotionally there. They weren't emotionally available, and that's a real toxic situation too, which creates trauma and creates difficulty in relationships, going into adulthood and that kind of thing. And I think you hit on a really powerful point, is that we don't really fully understand the full spectrum and dynamic of, so these micro traumas. Dr. Perry does talk about neglect in his book, What Happened to You? And he talks about simple things like just shaming and blaming, that we might do to our kids, and how impactful that can be, in very subtle, long-lasting ways.
Yeah, it's incredible. And the other part of that is then you create coping mechanisms, and they're little things and adjustments and things like that. But over time, they create. And there was a great I saw a podcast with Brene Brown talking about this, and I reference it all the time because it's so relevant as someone in the quote unquote midlife stage. But she said that when you get to midlife, you've built up an armor to get there, whether it's emotional or physical or coping mechanisms or habits or behaviors. And she was saying that unless you are aware of that and identify it, and then start to figure out how to not dismantle per se, but start to unpack that, it can really, really hold you back in terms of what you're now doing and how you show up for that next phase of your life.
Absolutely. And I think Gabor Mate, I'm sure you've heard of him as well. He talks about, coping skills, as sort of the gateway to, addiction and self-destructive type behaviors. And it's 100%, but he really takes it, his approach is more not like a blaming. I think in our culture, we often blame addicts, but he really recalibrates it in a sense and reframes it in a sense of like, this was a coping skill that you developed as a child to deal with whatever trauma you were going through. And then it manifests as you get older as maybe addiction or alcohol abuse or, a pattern of toxic relationships, that kind of thing. And again, I think we just need to reframe our understanding, a trauma-informed understanding, if you will, of our behaviors as adults. Luckily I had a psychologist. I took Psych 101 in my freshman year of college. And, he said something that really impacted me. He said, if you don't deal with your relationship with your parents by the time you're 30, in some type of therapy environment, it's going to impact you for the rest of your life. And that really stuck with me. So I started doing therapy around the age of 25, 26. And it was an absolute gateway to really understanding that dynamic between specifically my mother, and how that really informed my understanding of relationship.
Yeah, it's I think societally we don't want to deal with those things. It's uncomfortable. And then I think you then look at gender roles or gender specifics, and I think as men, there is a much like an even bigger kind of stigma around talking about feelings or having emotion or expressing them, or even so much as saying like, I'm struggling right now. And
Absolutely.
it's, I feel very fortunate that in the last year and a half, I've really found some great people and organizations. And Sean, I count you amongst those individuals that have helped me realize that it's okay. And that we're all going through different things. We all have, as you said, sort of these micro traumas. There's a comment here that LinkedIn, I can't see the name, unfortunately, but thank you for the comment saying, the big T's and the little T trauma and how those things all kind of play a role. And if you don't have an outlet, as you said, I mean, for myself, I didn't grow up with any of the traditional kind of quote unquote traumas, no alcoholism, no physical abuse, none of these things. Yet I found myself at times, drinking excessively. But I didn't know why. I'm just like, oh, let's go. And fortunately, it never manifested as, I didn't do drunk driving. I never did anything to my kids, but where is that coming from? It's not like I was having a glass of wine and watching a movie and enjoying it. It was the moment that bottle opened, I'm drinking like a lot of it. There's nothing worse than the Costco jug of vodka that you can get. And you look at it, you're like, wow, I only got that like a week ago and it's almost gone. It's
certainly I can relate to that, and I've done a lot of sobriety in my life. I'm currently living sober lifestyle, and it's interesting to really just reflect on our relationship with, alcohol, substances, whatever, and just see how, what is our relationship? What is our practice? What is our habit? And come to a real understanding of that. I wanted to kind of reflect a little bit on this big T, little T thing, in a sense of, how you were talking about relationship with our emotions as men, right? I think many men of our generation, and even younger too, are told to repress our emotions, stop crying, be a man, kind of thing, And so this messaging that we get as a child is that emotions are meant to be repressed, And so if we don't do some work around really feeling and understanding our emotions and where they're coming from, right, it can lead to, self-destructive type behaviors, right? And so, I think it's super important for men to do work around emotional intelligence, emotional awareness, whether it's in a therapeutic setting or whether it's in a group type setting. I'm a huge fan of group Gestalt type approaches. There's a lot of men's group sort of environments, but really, doing some therapeutic work around our relationship, to our fathers, to our mothers, and to other men in our lives, and having a better understanding of that, because again, we're modeling that behavior for our children, and so if we want our children to grow up with emotional intelligence, emotional awareness, and really understanding the thoughts behind those emotions, because as we know, it's the thinking that leads to the emotions, the feelings, right? And if we can get in touch with what are the thoughts that are leading to these emotions, then we can really start to transform our thinking, and then, get in touch with our feelings, and again, like you were saying, allowing the emotions to be okay,
Yeah. Yeah, I'll give a shout out here to the Iron Tribe, which is a group I got introduced to that are on LinkedIn, and we meet every Friday for an hour. And it has been just eye-opening for me in terms of seeing this diversity of men, different industries, different ages, different roles, different dynamics. And every single one of them has at times gone through some things, are dealing with some things, and it's been very powerful to, as you said, kind of in that group setting. There's no pressure, it's not really therapy, it's just conversations.
Yeah,
And it's powerful to hear that, hey, we're all I mean, this is the thing I've realized is like, we're all human beings.
we
there's
are.
there's
And
stuff going on, big, small, whatever.
Bruce Perry talks about this in his book again, to plug his book again. That community and connection is really one of the most important factors of overcoming trauma, overcoming, emotional or mental health challenges. It's really that connectedness that helps us. He talks about in the book, he gives multiple examples of people who, experienced trauma in their lives. And then it was the community or the social connections that allowed them to overcome them. One of the important things that he stresses in the book is the idea of the malleability, elasticity of our brain, right? And that we can, learn new behaviors. We can overcome bad habits. We can change our thinking patterns, but we need that support system and able to do that, right? People talk about it, in 12-step in addiction, where, you go back to your old crowd, right? What's going to happen? You're going to fall back into those old habits. You have to develop a community of people that are going to lift you up and support you in that transformation.
Yeah, I've used this analogy a few times that I remember being in, like, I don't know, elementary school or whatever it was, and you had to do like the fitness challenge once a year or whatever and I remember there was the bar hang where you'd have to hang on this bar for a certain amount of time. And I equate that to what it's like to try and form those new connections in the brain and those new habits that, intellectually and logically, this is what I should or shouldn't be doing. But it's kind of akin to that. You can do it for a few days or whatever, and then it's like, and you fall back, and then you have to kind of get back up there and do it a little bit more and a little bit more. And I've always loved the simplicity of this notion that, we have these grooves that have been formed over time in our brain. And so it's like a record for all those young people out there, this record where the needle, it would go in the groove, and it was so easy. And so it's really hard to then start, okay, we're going a different path here. We're going to create a new groove. And I love the simplicity of that, but it's incredibly hard. And I think that's why we see, whether you're talking about money or diet or mental health, that so many people, those New Year's resolutions that last all of a week and a half, and then you're back to the old patterns because you're trying to do it very much sort of logically and intellectually without really looking at the underlying programming and what you've been doing for, who knows, 20, 30, 40 years.
Yeah. And what I think the difference there and the distinction to make there is, discipline versus motivation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to develop the discipline where motivation runs out, right? There's going to be those days where you don't want to go to the gym. You don't want to go swim some laps. You don't want to go for that hike. You don't want to sit down for meditation, right? But it's where discipline comes in, where you're like, you know what, I'm going to do this because I'm committed to the outcome that I want to create, which is, healthier lifestyle, right? Or feeling better about myself, or, maybe it's like, taking that drink, or going out with friends and having a few or whatever, having the discipline to say, I'm not going to drink today, and just shifting that mindset into one of commitment to yourself in a sense, and it's not easy. Those grooves are there for a reason because you've gone down that path so many times, right? To use your analogy, let's put on a different record,
Yeah.
let's change the tunes, right?
Yeah. So you brought this up, and I mentioned it in the opening, kind of a yogi. I mean, I've done yoga for 20 years now, and it's absolutely, I think in some ways saved my life,
Likewise.
because it allowed me to find an outlet to get balanced and sort of get a lot of that negativity and that frustration out. I'm curious. So sounds like you've gone through a lot of challenging things in your life, as we all have. What are the things that you're doing to help kind of mitigate that and manage that? And as there's another comment in here, create those new pathways, those new grooves in your mind.
Yeah. So again, going back to discipline, for me, it's going to the gym, it's working out. I really enjoy swimming laps these days.
Mm.
That's kind of my go-to. I'm knocking on 55 this year, so I have to do lower impact type work on my body. Yoga is certainly a part of that. Meditation is still a part of that. I have certainly moved more into more of a meditation practice. I don't
Mhm.
do the kind of intense asana that I did 20 years ago. I still enjoy asana, but really, the asana or the postures are really to prepare the body for meditation. So if you feel like meditation comes easy to you, or you're ready to, for me, that's where the juice is. Obviously we get physical fitness and flexibility out of the asana practice. So for me, it's a combination, because I get bored easily, so I have to mix it up. So it's swimming, working out, lifting, going for hikes is key for me. I mean, we're lucky here in Tucson because there's a lot of availability and accessibility to loads of trails, and so I hit a trail, I find a rock, I sit down, I meditate, man, and for me that really recalibrates me. Also, just reading, I think a big part of yoga philosophy is the scriptures, is the writing.
Mm.
I've actually been reading Eknath Eswaran. I think I'm probably not saying his name correctly. His version of the Bhagavad Gita, I think, is just fantastic. So I'll read a chapter, kind of every day, and that's for me a real spiritual reset. And just kind of putting those thoughts in my mind. Creating new pathways of like, all right, this is going to be my thinking pathway today. I'm gonna meditate on this idea, of renunciation or sacrifice, or austerity in some way, or discipline. That's also one of the things that is emphasized in the Gita. So that's really my go-to. And again, it's not perfect by any measure. It's a discipline, it's a practice. And I love that they call it practice, right?
Yeah.
Because there is never perfection, in a sense. We're always practicing, and if you can kind of embrace that idea, then it becomes less insurmountable.
Yeah, I think we tend to be, our culture is so goal oriented, especially as men, that like there isn't a goal here. There isn't a, you just kind
Yeah,
of, and it's gonna be different for everybody. Whatever that works for you, how it works, what it does for you. And it's
I
so funny
think.
when I hear about people that do yoga or meditation and they're like, well, what's the goal? Or how do I do it quicker? Did I win? And you're like, I
Well,
don't know. Do you feel better?
well, that's part of it, of course, so feeling better, I think, and feeling more sort of in a loving, compassionate way. But I think, to be success oriented, the goal of yoga really is liberation. It's emancipation, really. And that comes when we leave this physical place, right? So I think we only know we succeeded when we actually, eject off this mortal coil, if you will. So we're never going to really know until we get there, right? um
Exactly.
yeah, so not to be too esoteric, but uh I think salvation is very present if we're focused on that higher mind idea of compassion and loving kindness, and hopefully we all get there. Well, I know we all get there. All rivers lead to
Yeah.
the ocean, right?
Yeah, I must say that I have a much, obviously empathy is important, and I've used empathy as a term, as a word many times in my work, but it's only the last few years I've really understood empathy, and empathy for, people that I don't know, people that I do know. And I very much find myself saying like, well, okay, this is what we're seeing them doing, but what's motivating that, or what's going on here, what's underlying. And to your point about sort of loving compassion and uh just understanding that we're all we're all just trying to get through the day. We're all just trying to kind of make it to the other end of the day, or to our loved ones, or whatever it is.
Yeah, I think right now with the state of things, and not to get political at all, but I think we need more compassion in our lives, for ourselves and for each other. And that's really going to be, I think, the thing that transforms our culture into a much happier place is just, compassion for one another. So hopefully we can all cultivate that in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you mentioned a couple times this idea of resetting. And I think that, to me, is the power of using your breath and having those moments to calm down, because otherwise I feel like it just kind of escalates and escalates and escalates. And to your point, and not to get political, but there's, whether we're talking political or just our media culture, is just this like barrage, this fire hose of, you don't look good enough, you don't have the right car, you don't have this, you're not that, you're not this. And you need those resets, whether it's reading a book, whether it's sitting down for a few minutes, whether it's having conversation with your kids, going outside and looking at, the moon or something, and realizing that it's okay. Just calm down.
Yeah.
That doesn't matter if you don't have the coolest pants or the latest whatever.
Again, I think people of our generation have a different experience with that because we actually got to have, the 80s and the 90s before cell phones and before all this technology. And as much as this accessibility and this dynamic of being able to have like a live feed and an interview like this, which is amazing, and a miracle in a sense, there was something very sweet about not having accessibility to everything all the time, where, when we were kids, we could just, ride our bikes for miles into some forest, and be lost in play. And there was no concern about, what's happening in this country millions of miles away that we can do nothing about,
Mm-hmm.
ultimately. And I think we all feel this pressure, of the world's problems collectively. And it feels overwhelming, and I think there has been certainly a movement to have more disconnection from media and have more of connection to our individual society and people in our world, and I'm certainly trying to cultivate that, especially sort of this post-pandemic reality. Is just really coming back to one-on-one connections and group connections.
Absolutely. I mean, at the root of it, despite all the technology and all the advancement and the Zoom calls and whatever else, we're just human beings. And we
Yeah.
need to have conversations. We need to recognize each other and take some moments to appreciate that. I'm a big one for, I keep a journal, and I don't overcomplicate it. In the morning, I write about gratitude, and then evening, I write about wins. And it's very simple. It's because I used to try and write all these like deep intellectual things, and it was like holding on to that bar, and I just couldn't do it. And so I wouldn't. And now it's just like, I just write a little list. And even if it's like, I got out of bed and had a shower, that's a win. Good job.
Yeah. I think journaling is a fantastic practice. I've been doing a journal to my daughter actually since before she was born, and it's a practice that I really enjoy. And maybe you can relate to this, but people who experience trauma as children, they often don't have a lot of memory of their childhood, and I wanted to really kind of document in some ways just the experiences that we had together and how much I enjoyed them, and be able to have a reference for her to come back to maybe and recall these memories in a sense, but ultimately just express this idea of that that there was just a lot of love there and a lot of enjoyment in my experience with her as a child. And so I love where this conversation has gone, honestly, around compassion and connection. And I hope if we leave any of the viewers with anything, if they can cultivate that in their lives, then maybe we'll all have a better world to live in.
I think that is a wonderful place to end up. And we're a little bit over our 30 minutes, but that's what's wonderful about this. We can kind of just meander and go wherever the conversation goes. But I do think that is a root place to get to, a foundation of compassion and understanding and kindness. And if we can all kind of do a little bit of that, a little bit more of that, and tune into more of that, it's happening all the time. We just need to stop looking at social media and stop looking at the news and stop looking at everything that's trying to show you the latest dumpster fire and look at the joy that's out there. I think we'd all be a little bit happier and a little bit better.
Yeah. So on that note, when the last time we met up, I think, we had coffee or whatever, and it turned into like a 2 or 3 hour conversation. So I just want to throw out the invitation. Let's do that again sometime.
Definitely. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I will. And maybe with that, we should close, but is there anything you've got going on at the moment, Sean, or any way people can get a hold of you? I know you're going to be potentially doing some new counseling and things like that. Is there anything you want to share?
I would say just reach out through LinkedIn or my direct email. I've got a classic email, burningart, BURNINGART, burningart@hotmail.com. I've had that email, I think, for 30 years. I love it. Still working.
You don't hear about Hotmail very often.
No, it doesn't even exist. You can't even get a Hotmail account anymore. Okay. But I won't let it go.
It's like a classic car. You've got a classic email.
It's true. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, so you can find me there. Please reach out. Anybody, if you just want to connect and have a conversation, especially if you're dealing with family court or parenting issues, I'm happy to just have a conversation around it. I really want to support parents and, especially anyone who's dealing with family court situations. It can be really devastating. I am going to be starting a new dads group here. I'm going to put it up on Meetup, and so I'll post something about that. And all dads are welcome.
Awesome. That's great. So anyone out there listening, please connect with Sean, learn what he is up to, and as someone who in the last year has joined a group and had some great conversations, I have nothing but amazing things to say about the benefits of doing that, whether it's with Sean or others. Just get out there and make some connections and have some conversations. That's what matters. It's not about winning or losing. It's just having a conversation. So with that, I will say thank you so much for your time, Sean. It's been wonderful, and I will definitely take you up on the coffee in the near future. And thank you to everyone out there that has been listening and watching. I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. And so with that, I will say cheers, and I'll do my little outro, but thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Ashley. It's great to chat. Hope to see you soon.
Definitely. We'll see you soon. Cheers. All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time. Powerful conversation there. If you don't know Sean, please connect with him. He is an amazing human being and so much insights and compassion to share. And so thank you again, my friends. And join me for the next Impact Tribe podcast, which is going to be Thursday, March 13th, with my special guest, Cornelius Kirk, better known as CK. CK is an author, speaker, workshop facilitator, and life coach with over 20 years of leadership experience. He is the father of 6 and lives by one motto: leave everything better than you found it. I think that is a wonderful motto. And so until next time, thanks everyone for creating positive impact in the world. Together, we can make change happen. Have a great weekend, everyone. Cheers.